very good day, good afternoon, good evening, based on wherever you're tuning in from. This is yet another episode of Ranch Alive, and you know, I'm Divya Mohan from SUSA, one of the principal technology advocates here, and I'm thrilled to have you all here, whether you are an OG viewer or whether you're just tuning in today. As always, a few ground rules before we start. This is a learning environment, and we expect that you are going to have questions about the topic of discussion. So, it's a sincere request to leave them in the chat box from YouTube or from, in the comment section on Twitter or LinkedIn, and we'll be happy to get to them during the Q&A segment at the end of the session. Next up, whenever you are having these interactions with the speaker and with the rest of the audience through the chat box, we request that you be respectful of each other. And that's just basically it. I don't have any further ground rules to set. But today we are going to be talking about something very interesting and new that sits right at the intersection of consistency, collaboration, and observability in Kubernetes, standardized reporting. And if you've ever sort of struggled or wrangled with policy violations scattered across tools because on the landscape there are oh so many of them, or wondered how to a single pane of then today we have policies. They've been working in their respective projects. Maintain or their projects, and also my stage firstly. And also, they're here to talk about OpenReports, a new open source project that aims to be the unified layer for reporting in Kubernetes. Think of it as open telemetry, but for all your compliance, audit, and policy needs. We'll dive more into this project, need behind this project, how it's designed to work with pretty much any controller or scanner, and how you can start deploying it in your organization. So let's get right into it. Welcome, Jose and Jim, to Ranch Alive, and it's so good to have you here. I'm so thrilled that we get to do this today.
Thank you, Divya. My pleasure being here.
Yeah, me too. Hello, everyone.
First up, I know that this is an episode about open reports, but I know that I also did not give a lot of context about your respective backgrounds. Do you want to take a minute to introduce yourself to our viewers, please?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Hi, everyone. I'm Jim Bagwadia, a co-founder and CEO at Nirmata, also maintainer of Kubernetes, which is a CNCF policy engine, and a co-chair, or I guess now the policy working group has, kind of been spun down, but I used to be a co-chair of the policy working group, and in the past also the multi-tenancy working group within the CNCF.
Yeah, and hello, my name is Jose. I'm working for SUSA, in specific for the Kubernetes project, which is also a policy engine for Kubernetes. And I've also worked together with Jim with this new initiative in OpenReports. Yeah.
So y'all are both very entrenched in the policy and reporting space, and pretty much I am sure y'all are aware of the challenges and the motivation behind this project. Could you actually share that with our viewers, both your perspectives really on what was this initial need for creating the project, and how did the working group actually identify this need? Was it through conversations with consumers of the projects that you're already working with, or was it something else?
Yeah, it was a combination of things, right? So the working group was started a few years ago, and the charter initially was to standardize policy architectures and policy management for Kubernetes, right? So Kubernetes, like a lot of of course, has things like a CNI and a CSI, and now like things like the Gateway API, which is a great model because it's designed to be very extensible. It gives a lot of choices, but then there's also that standardization of APIs that the Kubernetes, control plane needs to do its job. So it gives you sort of that best of both worlds, where there's choices and there's tools. And similarly, the folks who and working groups, for those of you who may not know, they're intended to be short-lived and have. And by the way, short-lived in open source terms can be multiple years, right? So it's not like just okay for a week or 2 weeks, but it spans for a while. But the charter of a working group is to, solve a particular set of problems and report into Kubernetes SIGs. Like there's, of course, authorization and security and several other special interest groups or SIGs within the Kubernetes community. So the charter of the policy working group was to, define what policy architectures look like, look at the policy landscape, see what can be standardized. And we looked at a lot of different things and found, there is a big need, of course, for policy management in the community because Kubernetes is declarative. It has very powerful and extensible configuration. So that level of policy and governance is required to make sure that you have the right guardrails as people are building platforms on top of Kubernetes. And one of the things that emerged is, hey, we need to be able to make sure that we can have, a standard way of eventually defining policies, but also of being able to take outputs from policies and show these to users, right? So that was the initial motivation. And then as we were doing that, the community kind of said, hey, what about other scanners? So if I have a, image scanner and I'm finding vulnerabilities, why can't I report it through the same API? If I have something which is checking, like maybe at runtime, other aspects of my cluster, instead of going to a different UI and different tool, I just want to publish reports. Why not use the same API, right? So that was the initial thoughts and the definition of the working group itself, which I think, and again, uh, help define the API constructs and the ideas behind the policy reports.
Jose, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I just agree with that because we joined the working group in the end of its life, and I consider that like as an example of how they do a good job because we just adopted and work out of the box. So, congrats for the work and looking forward for the next steps in the new project. Yeah.
Right. And I know that there was a lot of inspiration drawn from other projects as well. I did mention, it was like open telemetry. Do you want to speak to how, the inspiration that not just came from the conversations that you've had with project contributors and consumers, but also other projects influenced the goals of open reports and its architecture, probably?
Yeah, so certainly open telemetry, just conceptually, as it standardizes metrics, logging, tracing, things like that, has a sort of, there's a lot of parallels you can draw, right? And the whole idea, like in before, and for those of us who remember the world before open telemetry, every monitoring system had to kind of reinvent a lot of the same plumbing. Even if they use the same libraries underneath, it would be like maybe slightly different, and it's frankly a mess, right? Because again, customers have to deal with several different tools, they can't collect everything in one place. You can't just, plug and play with different components and build, different components on top of this, right? So that's where clearly there were some, perils and, good inspiration, seeing the success. And OpenTelemetry, by the way, is not that old, right? It's just what, maybe like 5 years or so. But we kind of just take it for granted now because it seems so obvious that this is something that systems like Kubernetes and other runtime systems require. So similarly with reporting, the idea, it's sort of what we were driving to is what are all the components required for reporting, right? And obviously there's publishers, there's consumers. In Kubernetes, there's different things you can do with API management. There's different ways you can serve custom APIs. So, and we've gone through a lot of lessons learned and a lot of, trial by fire, so to speak, right? To, harden things, to scale things. We have, seen clusters sort of get impacted if things are not done right. So there's a lot of lessons learned, and which is also the great thing about open source communities is you see everything, right? And by the time a component even goes to like the first or second release, it's much more hardened and battle tested than a lot of, and sometimes commercial software. So going through those experiences, learning from what again OpenTelemetry did was good. There are some key differences too because we're only Kubernetes focused. We're not running at the application layer. We don't have the mechanism of collectors and things like OpenTelemetry does. But conceptually, the end goal is the same: standardize the report output and make it as flexible as possible for different publishers and consumers.
Jose, any lessons learned or borrowed from the Kubernetes project? Because I know that Jim spoke to the open telemetry part. Do we have any lessons from the Kubernetes project that we borrowed and took to the open reports bit?
Yeah, I would say that is the idea to follow this idea of defining standards to reports was a huge achievement because it makes a way easier for us like policy engines to just create an object and that's it. From that on, you can use whatever you want, whatever tool that you are available in the community, and that's a really good achievement and makes the integration very flexible because you can use whatever you want. It's just a matter of configuring it. That's a really cool, and I really enjoy that. And for us in the Kubernetes project, that way it's one of the reasons we choose it because it was way easy to integrate with other stuff, and we don't need to focus right away to we need to integrate with 10 tools to make that visible for everybody. So that's a really nice.
Right. And now from I think the origins and the motivations bit, I want to switch to the actual nice meaty part of the Q&A session, because I do think that a lot of our audience would be interested in understanding how Open Reports defines and manages the reports as custom resources. And really, what are the advantages? We talked about standardization and a bunch of other advantages in the first segment, but um, Jim or Jose, can you talk to how does it define and what are some of the advantages in more detail, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And would love to, we can even pull up the, website and I can go through some of the key components there.
Absolutely.
Which, yeah, so open reports, and I'm sharing, I'm just at the open report side, I'm sharing my browser view right now. Um, so it has a few different components, and again, things which have been built over time, right? So the first thing, of course, is the API definition itself. Like Jose mentioned, the value is what does a standard report look like? So if a year ago, and I'll just pull this up here, if we go to the API definition, what we see is there's an object called a cluster report. There's, of course, the list type for it, and then there's a report object, right? And a report object has some standard fields that you would expect. But the important thing is a report summary, which compliance tools, like let's say you're in a regulated industry, you want long-term compliance, you want to know like not just what failed, but what also passed and the fact that your policies are actually being applied, right? So report summary will kind of give you like that pass fail counts for whatever scope, and reports can be aggregated at different scopes. Could be namespace level, could be application level, could be cluster wide. So there's a lot of flexibility here, and this is by design because we want this to be used in a wide, type of use cases. So, and then besides the report scope itself, you could have, like, as you go into the results side of things, now you can get into details. So you can see which, if there's a policy or like an ID, there could be a rule, there could be a category, severity, which is customizable, timestamps, and then again, the pass fail, or whether something was skipped. So those type of, standard fields. And some of this, by the way, we drew inspiration from other, other kind of, policy architectures and, for policy enforcement points as well as policy administration servers to see what would be the standard fields that should be defined here, right? And there's also an extensible field called properties, where if you want to put custom data, let's say for compliance, again, if you're auditing a network policy and you want to say this network policy rule is not compliant, you might want to put some properties from that network policy object in the report itself so that the somebody looking at the audit report understands what is compliant and what's not compliant. So those sort of things you can do in the properties, which is just the key value store within the report itself, right? So that's the API structure of the report, and that's the first part when you look at the tooling of what you get. But beyond that, there's also like, a web application, which, I'll show, called Policy Reporter, which you can use within a cluster to do that. It has a server-side component, which you can use as a flexible router to route your reports to like Slack or Teams or email, or, even integrate with other, kind of webhook services to get notifications. So if you want to integrate your reports and some reports into even a custom tool like PagerDuty, it's super simple to do now that you have a standard API and you have a standard, way of publishing and consuming these reports and some of the data. And then you have things like there's another component, and this goes back to some of the challenges we saw. So one of the things we quickly learned is, Kubernetes is, of course, designed to be extensible with, these different add-ons and controllers being added to the cluster. But, the main component, like the main storage component that's used within Kubernetes is etcd. And etcd has some very hard limits on the total size of, data you can store in there, as well as the size of each object. So this is not designed to be like a long-term database. It's meant for control plane and very critical configuration information, and it should be kept real time. So for larger clusters, the recommendation is to aggregate these reports and offload etcd into its own API aggregation service, which is also part of OpenReports, right? So these are the three main components in addition to the API. And then, of course, you have various report producers and consumers. And like the website shows, and anybody who wants to list themselves, feel free to create a PR. But these are some of the current producers. These are some of the current consumers, and it's a growing list. So as more people get aware and familiar with reporting and open reports, they can kind of add themselves here. Let me pause there and let's see if there's any other something else Jose wants to add in, and his experience also in integrating this.
Yeah, as I would just say that's a good. This report producing a report to consumers, and is an example of the power of standardizing. Like as the Kubernetes project, we adopted, and now we can use it for any of the report consumers, and that's it. Like it's pretty simple, easy, and it's great. I think it's as OpenTelemetry is great for users to reduce the learning curve to adopt something that they need to use. So that's great. Yeah.
And now I have a question for both of you because you've been working on this project. Now, when you were talking about the API, what challenges did you actually face when designing that API for the standardized report generation and consumption? Because I'm sure there were a lot of considerations, and you probably could not summarize them all in one 30-minute session, I'm sure. But what were like some of the top challenges that you faced when designing that API that actually gives you the standardized reports?
Yeah, so and again, this is like the testament to the power of community and open source, because it's always great to see all the different inputs and ideas that, initially we did not think about, all the flexibility required. But over time, one example that comes out, um, some tools use reporting almost as a log, right? So it's an event log of activity and things that are happening within that tool that they want to publish to external consumers. Other tools use reporting almost in a stateful manner to say, here's my current state of what's going on, right? So, making sure the reporting structure is flexible enough to accommodate those styles was something that evolved over time, right? So we added some fields carefully. The good news is, like in the last year or two, if you look at the change logs, it hasn't changed much, right? And it's been very stable, and which means that most consumers and producers are not seeing major gaps. And then we also added like this ability, what I showed, like the properties field, where like if somebody does want to add some custom data, etc., doesn't mean you have to keep changing the API or versioning the API. It's designed to be extensible from the beginning, right? So those type of things evolved based on feedback, based on as people were experiencing and interacting with the API itself.
Right. And when we talk about, you mentioned this briefly that you could just submit a PR to add yourself as a producer or as a consumer. But to actually produce and integrate with the project itself, is there a set process? Do you work with them? How does that work?
Yeah, so currently we don't have any formal like conformance testing or anything like that, right? But maybe over time, that's something that we have talked about. We might have some, and we want to make this as self-service as possible, much like people do with Kubernetes conformance. You basically run some test suites and which show that you're conformant, and you can create a PR to integrate or to at least, submit to your tool as a producer or a consumer, but really it's being compliant to one of these APIs. The project itself publishes, some common components, like the client set within Kubernetes. If you're integrating at the API level, Client Go generates like a lot of scaffolding and a lot of artifacts, which you can just incorporate from the project libraries itself. So we will be publishing more documentation, but there's several examples on how to create consumers, producers, and in fact, we can look at some of those, even live, just to see what that looks like in terms of the output and input.
Right. And one of the things that I did want to ask, as a follow up, when you were actually talking about like different tools, Jose, that both of y'all have worked with, when transitioning from those different tools to open reports, what is a typical migration path? What does it look like? Any of you can actually take that answer, right? I don't have a specific person. I remember Jose actually saying about the different tools, so that's why I just like pointed it at him. But yeah.
I would say if your current tool is not able to generate open report, migrate to one we can generate, like Kubernetes or Kyverno from Gym. That's I think one of the paths, and maybe you can run then for a while to evaluate both and then adopt whatever you want. But it's a matter of just adopting one that can produce open reports, and then we can select one from that consumes the reports. It's a matter of preference and I would say testing over time. Yeah.
I was on mute. I started speaking on mute. But Jim, do you have anything to add to that? What Jose said.
No, I think that makes sense. So, like again, if you're using tools, obviously there's a lot of value you will get, from standardizing on open reports. If you're consuming outputs from different scanners, etc. If you're writing tools yourself, right? I mean, it's just a Kubernetes API underneath, so it's
Yeah.
super simple. And then you get the power, like Jose was mentioning. You immediately get, if you're writing like a consumer, you will start seeing reports from other tools if you wish, right? And you can
Yeah.
filter that. But immediately now your dashboard or your project becomes a lot more interesting because you're seeing
Yeah.
reports from several other tools.
Yeah, and I can give the Kubord example how we did adopt the project, which is way very simple. It's just a matter of update our installation process to install the CRDs, and then update our audit scanner to create these objects with our policies evaluations, and that's it. The policies are there, so now you can use it with whatever producer you want. In our case, we added also in our installation an option that the user can enable the web UI, which will be useful to visualize the reports using a nice UI instead. And of course, you always can still use kubectl or this kind of thing. But if you have a nice view, you can use it. And we don't need to implement that from scratch. We just adopt some of the consumers, and that's it. It's pretty straightforward, I would say.
And what was like the adoption, or rather, like the story with Kyber Gym? Because now that Jose has said the keyboard part of the story, I also feel like I should ask you how was it like integrating Kyber with open reports?
Yeah, I can just show you what that looks like live, right? And that will be, I'll share my screen again. And if we, let me actually, this time I'll just pull up a console to start with. So this is on my local client cluster. I have, if I have Kubernetes installed, I have some cluster policies. And as soon as you install cluster policies, what will start happening with Kubernetes is it will, start scanning, of course, with your policies, and it will show me reports, right? So here's an example just from the CLI. I can see there's some violations. It's showing me 15 pass, 14 fail, and then it's, there's no warnings, etc. Right? And this was something created. This was last night when I was, just created this cluster for this session. And if I want to look at it here, of course, I can look at the report too, but it's a bunch of YAML, right? So now, obviously, this is where you need, like Jose was saying, some, other tools to look at the report. But if you just want to see what this looks like, I mean, it's readable. You can process it. It's in that API format that we saw earlier. But in real life scenarios, you will want to use something like Policy Reporter, right? So this is also part of Open Reports. And here it's showing me, because it's running Kubernetes, it's showing that as a source. It's showing me I have two categories of policy: pod security, baseline, and also like the restricted set. And I can see clearly now what is pass, fail, etc. In each one of these, right? And you can also, like with policy reports, like I mentioned, there's a server component which has a very flexible routing system for reports based on different violations, based on different labels. You can route things to different Slack channels or different sources or report consumers, right? So if you even have a webhook for like PagerDuty or something like that, and you scan and see a critical report, that's super simple to do. But this is also, these are just policy reporters on a single cluster. Then there's tools like, Nirmata, and of course other, like tools which can aggregate this, look at this over time, consume it in different formats, and even analyze and look at trends, etc., which, becomes super interesting at scale, right? So, but all of that is possible because we have a standard API and some of these core components to work with and to get started with.
True. And as we look ahead, the project itself is pretty new. What are some of the things on the roadmap for the next year or even the next 6 months? Because this is a pretty exciting space to be in. So, are there, specific targets that you'll have in terms of we need this specific thing achieved by the next year or next 6 months, something like that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the big milestone, of course, was, although the project is new, first of all, the reports API has been around for quite a while, right? So we, again, incubated this in the policy working group. We got adoption from several, projects. We got feedback. And because working groups have a temporary life, we had to find a home for this API and figure out what's next. So we looked at various options and felt the best option was to create open reports, right? And make that a community for everybody interested in this topic and people wanting to write, consumers, publishers, or even just use reporting. So that was the big milestone of migrating the API from the policy working group. So that's been done. And now this is ready to be consumed. And what we are about to do, like in Kirano, in the next release, we will be upgrading from the workgroup policy, CRDs now to the open report CRDs, which is just basically changing the API group. There's no other change. And then we will also be, there's components like I showed, the policy reporter, and there's the API aggregation server, which we're transferring from the Kubernetes project into open reports, right? So those are things we want to complete. And after that, we'll be doing, just working again very much with the community, getting a lot of, feedback and helping onboard publishers, consumers, and other components within that, right? But it's so the API itself has been fairly stable, but would love to get more feedback, more usage, and feed, to see what else can we do with this and how can we leverage some good case studies and use cases of leveraging this API in the wild.
And
Yeah.
talking about feedback. Oh, I'm sorry, Jose. Do you want to add? I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. And besides that, I would say that we also need to, even if we come from the working group, we need to establish the community as the new project. So that's a tough task usually. So that's what we are here as well. So I think that's one of we need to achieve as well. Yeah.
So talking about feedback, are there any plans to actually integrate it with any external platforms, so to say, or is that like too far a goal to talk about right now?
Yeah, so there are already integrations. I know,
Mm.
there has been trying to think about some of the external open source platforms. So there are commercial platforms which are already using the open reports standard, which have been listed in the consumers. There's also like some open source projects which are starting to use this. So clearly, yeah, definitely, the more wider adoption, that will help us kind of see if there's any refinement or changes that still need to be made, or if there's more components and more tooling that's required, right? So from that perspective, the idea is and from users also to start seeing the benefits of putting this in their clusters versus having like 6 different dashboards to look at or for any change or things like that.
Yeah.
Right. And Jose actually brought up a very good point of community being the hardest part. I do believe in that as well, because people in general are a little more complicated than software, I've discovered. Uh, but this is to understand more around, how in within the community itself, because you are from different projects, and I know that you'll have been involved in the policy working group individually. How are decisions exactly made in terms of like the project reviewing and approving, and how can someone actually contribute to this community effectively? Like, getting started is one aspect of it, but how does the decision making generally work within the project?
Yeah, from my experience when I joined the working group originally, the decisions making was made by talking basically, and then when we agree on some proposal, let's vote for it or use lazy consensus for deciding stuff, and that's even the spin down of the working group was done by following these steps, and I think that's is a good start. Maybe we need to adapt later on when the community grow or something like that. But for now, I think that's the good starting point.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of good work that, so many other CNCF projects, and of
Yeah,
course, Kubernetes itself has done. There's no reason why for us to do anything different in
yeah,
these, areas. And in terms of contributing, of course, everybody is welcome. The repos are public, so create a PR or reach out on Slack. There is a Slack channel in the CNCF Slack workspace. So just post your questions there. And then, again, the easiest thing to do is try it out and give your feedback or share your feedback, on any of these forums, right? Yeah, and governance wide, we, plan to kind of just adopt like the CNCF
yeah,
processes in terms of governance of the project itself. And like Jose said, probably the hardest thing, and I remember even my first, community meeting, because you're trying to figure out, okay, should I say something? Should I not say something?
yeah,
Is it like appropriate?
yeah,
What is expected, right? And nobody knows.
yeah,
But just if you feel you should say something, say it, right? And it's better.
yeah,
And everybody is, looking for feedback and participation. So
yeah,
just jump in and start doing things is the best way.
yeah.
Right. And you mentioned about people giving feedback, but for contributors who want to get started with your project, are there any specific areas that you're looking to invite contributors into, specifically those newer to the ecosystem?
Yeah, so there are some open issues like we saw, but those are mostly right now to migrate components. I think we need to do some more work around testing components and scale testing. So we'll be setting up, issues for that. So like with other projects, one of the things we'll do is like mark some good first issues for new contributors. But then for people who are just looking to also learn and explore and get involved, and people have been, in fact, one of the consumers of this API, the last 4 or 5 PRs came from them, right? Because they wanted to propose a few small, changes, things like that, more to make things a little bit more up to date with the latest in Kubernetes. So people just start contributing by doing again and using the APIs there.
Right. And as this ecosystem matures, I know that you spoke briefly to the to where you see it in 1 year. How do you see this project evolving down the line? Because Kubernetes is right now in its second decade. How do you see this project evolving?
Yeah, I think so reporting, first of all, it's something that you want it to just work and you don't want to think about it often, right? So it's okay, and it's actually a good thing for some projects to be boring and just so stable that you almost never have to think about it. It just works, right? So to me, success is that. If it's a very, constantly changing project, that's sometimes not good because especially again, when for compliance, security, you want things to just work, right? And you don't want to worry about this. You don't want to, keep seeing like, constant, again, churn and change in those. So from that perspective, I feel, this falls into that stable and boring type of category of projects, which in fact I like, because that way, it becomes like a fundamental component everybody relies on, but nobody thinks about.
Yeah,
What
I
about you,
agree.
Jose? Yeah, I'm sorry.
100%. No, boring stuff is nice sometimes. Yeah, I agree. And once the we have this stable, we can always add more work reports like types on data or using the same stepstone. So I think that's 100%. I agree 100% with that. Yeah.
And I realized we're like 10 minutes about time, but Hridesh has actually just asked one question around open telemetry and policy as code platforms. I just want to pop that up here so that y'all can answer it. If open telemetry and policy as code platform perform similar actions, would there be scenarios where we should integrate them for different components, or wouldn't there be such a need?
It's a good question, right? And certainly, I think it's something that I've been thinking about, also bringing up with the Open Telemetry group, seeing what their thoughts are. So there are similarities, like we discussed, but there's also key differences. So typically, like just taking this project itself, Open Telemetry would apply to like the components, the runtime components, but reporting is a slightly different layer because you're exposing things back to your consumers, you're publishing it at that level, right? So I don't think it directly fits into open telemetry, but there's a lot of there's some similarities too, so it's at least worth a conversation.
All right, Jose, any closing thoughts on that, or do you completely agree with Jim here?
No, I agree. I agree. And I said for the current state, I don't think we do exactly the same things, but we follow the same principles, I would say. But yeah, I agree with Jim. Maybe in the future we found something that can merge together, but for now, I think we are in the set right paths. Yeah.
And with that, I hope we answered your question, Radesh. And I do not see any other questions come in. So I'm going to take this opportunity to thank both of you for coming on and explaining the project to us. This was a very insightful session. And also apologies to all our viewers. I realize that the video has been lagging. Our client unfortunately is acting up, the streaming client, and as a result it's been a little laggy on our front. So apologies for that. Can't do anything about it personally. But hopefully you did get a glimpse of what the project looks like, and I will be including the links to whatever we've discussed in terms of the website, the GitHub, GitHub page, etc., for the project. And Jim, if you have any resources, or Jose, if you have any resources that you'd like to pass on that I should publish in the description section, please please do that. I'd be happy to pass them on to our audience. But thank you so much for coming on today, both of you all.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for arranging that. Thanks, Jim, for accepting to join the call, and thank you for everyone that's watching. And I hope you join forces with us.
All right then, thank you so much, and we'll see you on another episode of Rancher Live soon. Have a good day till then. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Take care.